Hey folks, it's Claire from Impactful People. Thanks for joining us for another episode of our podcast. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Declan Edwards. Declan, would you like to give a little intro to yourself?
Yes. First and foremost, thank you again for inviting me on the show. I know our paths only crossed relatively recently, and it immediately kind of went into we need to have conversations like this with a microphone in between us. So I'm glad to be here. For those who haven't come across me in my work yet, my name is Declan Edwards. I'm a happiness researcher, coach, and consultant, which is an absolute dream job title that I didn't know existed 10 years ago when I was starting in this space. Basically, what it means is I've spent my whole career studying the field of positive psychology, which is sometimes called the science of happiness, and then use what I've learned from that to create a social enterprise called BU Happiness College, which helps individuals and organizations learn those skills and science of happiness, learn how to build and develop them, and ideally make the world a little bit of a happier place. So been very grateful to be doing that work now for the last 8 years.
Well, I'm so grateful people like you exist and are doing this work in the world, first of all. But I think, there's so many areas we can dig into. And later on, I'll talk about how we ended up connecting, because there's obviously some questions and topics we can talk about around that. But I always like to really start with the basics. And I think actually for this topic, it's really important of what is happiness?
It's a good question. Look, that is a question that we have been asking as human beings for thousands of years. You can go back to the ancient Greek philosophers and they're asking, what is happiness? So I'll say a couple of things here. I've come to believe a couple of things about happiness. First and foremost, happiness is an umbrella term for a lot of different emotional experiences. So the reason I highlight that is a lot of the criticism or resistance I get from people when they think about prioritizing happiness is they only think about it in the terms of these fleeting feelings like joy or pleasure. They come quick, they go quick, and so they go, well, what's the point of focusing on that? What's the importance of that at work and in my own personal life? And whilst it's true that joy and pleasure are forms of happiness, we know that there's all these other forms of happiness too, like meaning, purpose, contentment, connection, excitement, surprise, right? There's all these forms. There's a beautiful, beautiful tool called the feelings wheel, which I encourage everyone to look up. Right. And it shows this kind of like branch of all these emotions that would sit under the umbrella term of happiness. So I encourage everyone, first and foremost, to think about happiness as more than just a fleeting feeling. There's all these different feelings that sit under that term. And then the other way I encourage people to think of happiness is as a skill, which is to go, hey, there are actually things that we can develop that lead to us being happier people and living happier lives. We know that from the research. And historically, these skills have been called soft skills. I try to call them human skills now, or happiness skills. Things like emotional intelligence. How well do you understand and manage your emotions? Things like resilience and grit. Things like self-awareness and self-esteem. Like, we know these skills and traits, when they're learnt about, they're developed, they're practiced, tend to lead to a higher satisfaction with life, ergo more happiness. So yeah, to start with, I'd say, hey, look, first and foremost, what is happiness? We've been talking about it for thousands of years. For me personally and professionally as a researcher, I say it's an umbrella term and it's a skill. And if we can do those two things really well, historically, I've seen people live a lot happier lives.
I love that, because I think that the umbrella bit is really important, because I think a lot of the time we are chasing these fleeting moments that are fleeting, and that's in the impossible dream of assuming happiness is being in this permanent state of joy or pleasure, which we know is not possible in life. And your second point around skill, I think that's really empowering. It means we can actually go and do something about it. We're not dependent on the world around us, or, there's actually things we can actively take control of. So I love. So how has your personal journey been with happiness? Because I know how, if I was studying this myself, I would probably be doing a lot of internal reflection on the times of my life I've been happy, the things that I'm doing, maybe put pressure on myself to be somebody who is visibly seen as being happy all the time. So what's that journey been like for you?
Yeah, look, I'm very much open in saying to people that as much as I've done this now professionally for quite a few years, and I'm seen as somewhat of an expert in this field, I'm still definitely a student. I'm still learning this and still working on it. And I hope that's always the case. I hope my journey with happiness and learning more about myself and my own happiness skills doesn't end. I hope I get to continue learning and developing that. But how it started was going through high school, really struggling with my own sense of self. And I didn't know that at the time. right? At the time, I was doing what you mentioned before. I was chasing the I'll be happy when. I'll be happy
Yes.
when I get the good grades. I'll be happy when I get in a relationship. I'll be happy, when I impress my father. I'll be happy when I make the basketball team, when I get a job. Like, it was always around the next corner. And I was fortunate enough to notice pretty early on in life that I would reach these milestones and feel happy for a moment. And then I'd immediately set a new goal and a new target. And I was just spending my whole life chasing. And I went, okay, well, there's something not quite working here. I was struggling a bit with my own sense of self, with my own self-esteem and self-worth, struggling a bit with anxiety at the time. And very thankfully came across a man by the name of Sebastian Terry, who went on to become a good friend and mentor of mine. And he was the first person who kind of set an example for me of someone really living life by his definition of happiness, not chasing someone else's. He'd actually
Yeah.
gone, what are my values? What matters to me? What kind of life do I want to live? And had set out to pursue that. I hadn't seen that before. And so it got me self-reflecting, and I realized pretty quickly, could almost write down on a piece of paper, what are the things that I want? Self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-trust, self-belief, all these terms. And I went, they're all starting with the same word here, self. And I went, I have no idea who myself is. I don't know what my values are. I don't know what my strengths are. I don't know what matters to me. If you ask me what a happy and successful life looks like at the time, I'd say, going into the military or into the police force. I'm actually the first male in 5 generations on my dad's side of the family to not be military and police force.
Wow.
And so I was like, I don't actually have a blueprint for what happiness is. I could copy my family histories, but in a way I'd kind of just be gambling on whether I'd be happy or not. And so I started asking Seb and these other, people that I came across. I was like, hey, you seem to be living a pretty meaningful and purposeful life that's aligned to you and your definition of happiness and success. How'd you figure that out? Like, I feel like I wasn't exposed to this early in life. Where'd you find it? It's like they had a little secret recipe that wasn't in my recipe book. And so many of them started mentioning positive psychology, this field of research that went, hey, we need to understand from an evidence-based lens what makes life worth living. How do we make people fulfilled and happy? And at the time, I was getting ready to go to university. I was studying journalism first and then swapped from that into health. And very thankfully found out that I could do a postgraduate degree because I had an undergrad in health. I could do a postgraduate in positive psychology. So I took the leap, went across, started learning that. It was one of the first cohorts in Australia through that program at the university that I went through. And just fell in love with it. I went, this is a toolkit and a science that I wish I learned earlier in life. And the more I learned about it, the more I felt happier, the more I felt more aligned. And I kind of went, maybe this is what I'm meant to be doing. And joked with my fiance at the time, now my wife, I said, how good would it be if there was a place like a happiness college where instead of just learning skills to be a good employee, you learned skills that made you a better human being? And was not naive enough to go, well, maybe I'll make one. So yeah, it's something that I've personally and professionally just absolutely fallen in love with and thankfully get to do for a living now.
Yeah, I just think it's awesome. There's so much in there that I'd love to dig into. But I mean, I won't dig in too much into how your family feel about you taking this route over police and military.
Good
Um,
now. Good. I've
yeah,
got a great relationship now with my dad, but oh my God. It was a while, let me promise you. As someone who's come again, 5 generations of military, emotional intelligence was not
mhm.
a high priority skill in our family. So we've had to do
Have
some
you coached,
learning together.
have you coached people in your family?
No, that's a clear rule that I have. My wife has actually been through the college. She's a graduate of BU, but we had a very clear rule when she enrolled that she would not be working with me directly. She'd work with one of our coaches who work for me. She said, I
Hence,
need you to be my husband, not my coach. And I went, that's a very, very fair call.
I'm with you on that. You've got to know the healthy boundaries, haven't you, to keep the relationship sane?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know more about some of the things you're teaching on your course and in the college as well, and some of the kind of practical tips and tools that you're giving people or encouraging people to explore more personally.
So I think the most important one to start with, actually, I'm going to go the most important 2, if I can be cheeky like that.
Absolutely.
Again, comes back to awareness and literacy. Now, what I mean by that, a lot of people know about emotional intelligence. It's been spoken about for about 20, 30 years now as such a vital skill for people to develop. The ability to be aware of and understand and manage our emotions well and effectively and in healthy ways. We fundamentally cannot have good emotional intelligence without emotional awareness and literacy first. And we have a huge gap. I know in Australia, I would bet in the UK and the US as well, we have a huge gap when it comes to emotional literacy, the ability to recognize and name our emotions. So the gold standard, if we were to aim for best practice, is we should all be able to, as adults, as functioning healthy adults, recognize, name, and healthily work through 30 distinct emotions. Now, if you ask the random passerby how many emotions they can recognize, name, and healthily work through, you're going to be lucky to get 5 to 7 at the moment.
Yeah.
We've got a long way to go with this. So that's, again, where tools like the feelings wheel are a fantastic way to do this. It is one of my favorite tools for helping build out that emotional awareness and literacy. I've actually seen TikTok videos and Instagram videos go viral somewhat recently of people learning about it and getting it on a cushion and giving it to their family members, which I think is the most hilariously passive-aggressive way to tell a loved one that they need to improve their emotional intelligence. Like, here's a cushion with all the emotions on it. Refer back to it when we next have a conversation. But so start with that. So start with emotional awareness. And the second one is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is, do you know your core values? Do you know your character strengths, your unique strengths that you do exceptionally well? I have mine on a Post-it note in front of my computer at all times. And if you don't know them, there's a test that you can do. It's free. It's evidence-based through the field of positive psychology. If you go to VIA Character Strengths, there's a 20, 30-minute test that you can take that will say, hey, here are the 5 traits that you do exceptionally well. And what they've found through research in positive psychology is when you know your strengths and you utilize them, there's been all these cool studies about like you become more effective and more compassionate and connected in your relationships. You have a higher sense of self-esteem and self-understanding. You perform better at work. It can lead to pay rises and promotions. Like when people know what they uniquely do well and they exercise that, really beautiful things happen. So if I was to say, hey, look, 2 big pillars to start on if you want a happier life, build your emotional awareness and literacy and get to know yourself. Understand your values and your strengths.
Just like so many conversations I'm having with people about leadership, and it all comes back to you as an individual and knowing who you are, knowing what you're about, who you want to be, and how you're going to show up every day. And I think the problem is it's basically like being in therapy, moving into a leadership and a management role, but we're not prepared for that, and we're not getting the support of a therapist through that journey. But it is such, if you're not willing to be self-reflective, your success in leadership roles in work, your relationships outside of work, any of that, it's going to be incredibly difficult. And I personally, I've got very self-reflective, but still struggle with the literacy around the language, but also the feelings that come up with some of that self-reflection of what that means about you. But also I've got 2 young kids, and one of them in particular, we've had to do a lot of work in helping him identify his emotions and be able to articulate them to us in a kind of age appropriate way. But I think there's a lot of shame. I think my takeaway, maybe that's me reflecting myself here, but also what the journey I went through with my children is it feels like there's a lot of shame associated with those feelings. And that's my gut feel is that's because we're not taught to explore those things and be self-reflective earlier in our journeys. And your point there that made me think about this, about focusing on our strengths, is throughout our education system and work life it's always like, these are the things you need to fix to be better. These are the things you need to fix to be better. They're your weaknesses. You need to work on them, rather than really encouraging people to lean into their strengths and leverage their strengths and be experts in the things that are their strengths, even though there's always going to be things to work on around that. So kind of what's your thoughts on that? And do you think there are things we should be doing in the education system earlier in our journeys?
Definitely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the point there around a lot of us were raised either in an education system, a society, or a family and household where focusing on our quote unquote weaknesses and what we need to improve was overvalued, and focusing on our unique strengths and capabilities and celebrating and strengthening those was undervalued. I mean, you can even look historically. This is how positive psychology was born as a field of science. Right? The founding fathers of positive psychology, Dr. Seligman and a bunch of other researchers, basically came out and said, For 100 years now, the vast majority of our funding and research has gone into mental ill health. Not mental health, mental
Yeah.
ill health. What are people's mental and emotional challenges and struggles, and how do we help them overcome them? Now, don't get me wrong, that is incredibly valuable and needed and important work. And I'm so glad that over the last 20 to 30 years in particular, the stigma towards addressing mental ill health and mental challenges and mental struggles and emotional struggles, we've been making massive grounds there, which is fantastic. But if that's all we ever did when it comes to the spectrum of mental health and well-being, the best we could hope to get to would be neutral. The best we could hope to help people get to would be, I'm getting through life. And I think there's a hell of a lot more to life than just getting through life. And so this is why we also need to look at how we go from neutral to plus 10. How do we feel like we're fulfilled and thriving and flourishing and able to live our best lives, right? Even with the challenges that the world faces. So I do think there's a lot of room for, we need to focus in so many areas, health, education. We need to broaden the perspective from how do we go from minus 10 to neutral to also how do we help support people go from neutral to plus 10. And the other thing I'll say on that too is so much, again, of how we're raised in education, at home, in society, is the answer lies outside of you. You need to go find the answer out there in the world somewhere. When realistically, so much of what it comes to with helping better understand ourselves and live a better life actually comes from inside of us. One of the first things I say to everyone who comes to the college is, we are experts in our space. We are not experts on you. We will never be experts on you. We've not lived your life. We've not had your experiences. It's when those two areas of expertise come together that magic happens. Yeah. And so that level of introspection, that level of looking inwards for our answers rather than outwards, is a big change for a lot of people. It's a change that makes a hell of a difference.
All that I'm taking away from this is the stereotypical midlife crises is basically realizing happiness is not what we thought it was. You get to this point in your life where you're suddenly like, oh, wait, I've been chasing all these things that I thought made me successful and happy. And actually, I've realized that isn't what happiness is about. And I've lost my self-identity because I've not focused on the things that I value and that make me happy. And I'm saying that as a sweeping statement. I know it's hard and time consuming and, it's not black and white, but yeah, I just say it's such an important dialogue to be having earlier and thinking about what you can do and take ownership of to drive your own happiness, which will take us on to a bit around how we connected. So we originally connected after I shared a bit of a ranty post about a job ad that one of the requirements for a head of people was responsible for team happiness. So happiness in the workplace, I think, has definitely become more of a common theme. And before I get ranty about my views on it, I would love to understand more about your perspective, the work that you're doing with businesses. What are you teaching businesses about happiness, and what should they care about?
Yeah, look, this is such an important area. It's become an area that's increasingly captivated my attention and my work over the last few years. And I ended up in it somewhat accidentally. In 2019, one of the sophomore year members at BU Happiness College, so someone doing the program for himself, for his own self-awareness and understanding and happiness skills, when I'm learning a lot from this. Our organization is going through some massive change, and I'm already seeing stress and burnout are going to be a big problem for our people.
Yeah.
I would love for them to learn these skills and tools so that they can better manage the changes that are ahead and better navigate stress and burnout. Now, I said to him in full transparency, I said, that sounds fantastic. I've never worked with a team or an organization before. I've worked with individuals for many years. Yeah. And he turned around and went, well, a team's just a group of individuals. Teach them the same thing you're working on me and we'll see what happens. And next thing I knew, I was over in Dallas, Texas for a month working with him and his team. So I'm from Australia. Like, this is a move over to another country for a little bit to help work with them. And I fell in love with this ripple effect that can happen when you change an organization's culture, when you equip their leaders with the human skills, those soft skills or happiness skills that lead to a more humanistic approach to leadership. The impact that has on their staff, the impact that has on their customer experience and their client experience, the impact it has on their staff's families is quite far-reaching. And so I came back from that quite touched and changed and went back to do my master's degree in positive psychology. And my thesis was specifically on how is happiness defined and measured in the workplace setting?
Yeah.
Because I started coming across all this amazing research that said, hey, happier organizations enjoy all these incredible benefits. Right? They have higher productivity. They have lower rates of absenteeism and unnecessary turnover. They outperform their competitors on the stock market. There was all these things that just went, all these traditional business measures that people care about, profitability, productivity, versus absenteeism versus high engagement, high performance, like all these things that people care about seem to be downstream from a fundamental question of, are your people happy at work? Yes or no? And at the time, again, this is 2019, early 2020, people weren't asking that question. They were starting to talk a little bit about culture, engagement, leadership, well-being, maybe well-being at work, maybe psychological safety if you were lucky, or if you were really visionary at the time. And so I started asking the question, hey, all that comes downstream from a bigger question. Are your people happy here, yes or no? And if no, we need to find out why and what to do about it. And then the pandemic came along. And all of a sudden, our relationship with work fundamentally changed.
Absolutely.
Organizations went, people's expectation of work has changed. And organizations went, if we're going to survive, let alone thrive, we need to be an employer of choice. We need to attract, retain, and elevate the best people in our field and industry. And we don't know how to do that. And so again, I went, well, the question is, why? What's your evidence for people are going to be happy here? Because that's what they care about. And so it was this kind of ripe moment, this perfect opportunity to step into that space. And what my team and I did is we developed a tool called the Workplace Happiness Report, where organizations can take evidence-based surveys with their team and we diagnose, we actually track and measure the 5 big contributing pillars to how happy people feel at work, which is how high is their well-being, how engaged are they, how healthy is the culture that surrounds everything, it's kind of the glue that binds it together, how effective and humanistic are our leaders, and how resilient are our team in the face of burnout and change. If we do those 5 things really well, guaranteed you'll have happy staff, you'll have a really high employee experience. If those pillars start falling, that's where there's going to be issues. So what I've spent the last 4 years doing is diagnosing that and then going, how do we solve those? How do we fix them? It's really, really enjoyable work.
I mean, I think this is really interesting because I think whenever you speak about happiness, it feels like a fluffy thing. Like you kind of talked about some of these being seen as the soft skills, and I agree. I don't love the language that sits around it. So I think, you know, all business leaders love some metrics. We love data-driven decisions. How is some of these, how are you finding these conversations to get leaders on board with this? Because you're talking a lot there about kind of linking this back to business performance. How are you doing that in terms of measuring the benefits of the work that you're doing with the teams to increase happiness scores, say, and how that's correlating back to the business performance?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of things that we look at there. There's either evidence pulled from academic studies versus also the measurements that we get from doing the diagnostic process. So if I talk about the academic studies to start with, Sean Aker is the go-to person in this space, was involved at Harvard for a while with positive psychology research. And Sean and his team found these amazing, amazing results, like happy salespeople. They did this long study on a series of salespeople in a few different industries and organizations and found that people who were genuinely happy at work sold 37% more than people who weren't. So you get to start now going to organizations and going, would you like 37% more sales? Because I know I would. Right? They go, yeah, actually I do. And you go, well, let's look at that. Right? Then we get to pull all this other amazing data. Like we know that the cost of disengagement in workplaces at the moment averages in Australia, it's about 15,000 Australians. Let's say 7,000-ish, £7,500 per year for every disengaged employee. For every employee who's just kind of showing up, doing the bare minimums, doesn't really give a stuff about their work and what they're doing, doesn't want to go the extra mile, you're losing in direct and indirect costs. So poor productivity, lost opportunities. You're losing about £7,000 a year. Now you take that across 30 staff, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of lost productivity and performance. We know well-being has an impact, right? And so we know burnout. If you lose a staff member to burnout, the cost to replace them by the time you do the recruitment process, upskilling a new person, building those relationships out, potentially losing clients from who had relationships with the previous person, the risk legally now of being held accountable for psychological impact and psychosocial impact on staff, that costs about 33% of an employee's salary. So if you're paying someone £50,000 a year, and you lose them to burnout, what's that? 33%, about £15,000, £17,000. It's like the numbers add up. And when you
Yeah.
take those numbers, you can go to organizations, and this is what we do. We go, hey, on average, for every dollar that is strategically and intentionally invested into improving your people experience, aka how happy your team are at work, you're going to get about $2.87 back in a year. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, if someone said to me, hey, there's a stock on the stock market at the moment that's going to give you a 287% return in 12 months, what's everyone going to go do? They're going to go buy the damn stock, right? And so when we can put numbers to it, because I'm with you, I think morally and ethically, I'm used to going to executives and to leaders and workplaces and going, hey, looking after your people is morally and ethically the right thing to do because you should be a good human and you have the moral and ethical responsibility to the people who've chosen to work for you. But I'm also a realist and I know that that doesn't move the needle. So the backup is to go, morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. And it's really good for your bottom line. And here's all the evidence that shows it.
The pincer approach is always the best. Always the
Right,
winner.
exactly. So that's the evidence. That's the academic side. And then if I go, how do we measure it on an individual per workplace? We use the best of a terrible system that we have, which is anonymous surveys to staff. All surveys have issues. We've done our best to make sure that ours are evidence-based. They're really safe psychologically, so we get really honest answers. They're done third party. They're fully anonymous. We've got questions in there to check whether people are just kind of lying their way through it. We can catch them out and remove them from the data pool. And so we make sure it's done really well. And then when we get it all back, we crunch it and we're able to put all those contributors to happiness to raw numbers. We can say, hey, overall happiness score is 67%, for example. And then underneath we go, well, your well-being score is 80%. Your well-being is actually really good. Your engagement's down at 40. We need to look at engagement. Your culture's at 50. Your leadership score, 55. It's got a bit to be desired. Your resilience still pretty high. People still are pretty resilient in change. So it just gives us a bit more nuance to be able to make the right diagnosis and the right decisions.
I love the focus on resilience here. I think that's often missed because one of the questions I was going to ask you is how what you're doing differs from like traditional engagement surveys that are out there that do try and touch on kind of how people feel about their leaders, doesn't really dig into the humanistic side, but is, do you trust them kind of things? And they'll give you well-being scores. So how is what you're doing differ from engagement? And then how you mentioned there's kind of a score for engagement within your survey as well. How does that kind of fit in?
Yeah, so I think the biggest point of difference from what I've experienced compared to what I've seen out there is taking this comprehensive approach. The amount of organizations we've worked with who go, hey, we've run an engagement survey for the last 3 years. And I go, okay, cool. What decisions has it led to? Because like doing an engagement survey shouldn't just be done for the sake of doing an engagement survey. It's like, what strategic differences did it make? And they'll talk about it and I'll be like, so why are we talking now? Like, why are we talking if you've done this survey for the last 3 years? And they're like, well, we're losing people. I'm like, interesting, but your engagement for the last 3 years has been relatively high. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so there's obviously a problem here. We're either not getting the right people to respond. And by the way, if you go globally, the response rate for in-house surveys sits at anywhere from 17 to 22%. You're getting 1 in 5 people in a workplace to answer those bad boys honestly and truthfully, which means you're only going to hear from the extremely happy or the extremely unhappy, right? You're missing the majority in the middle, who are the ones that we want to win over if we're going to have a great workplace. Right? So the thing that makes ours different is, A, we're looking at the whole picture. That's not just measure engagement. I've seen a lot of organizations, actually, you know where this happens a lot? For-purpose industries. Allied health, social work, not-for-profits, education. Engagement tends to sit relatively high. Well-being sits low. And, culture, leadership, depending on the actual specific workplace. But I've noticed there's this trend of like, they're so passionate about their work. They care about it. They know the meaning and purpose. They want to do great work. Well-being's the issue.
Yeah.
Right? Or resourcing is the issue there, right? So again, we need to look at the whole picture. We need to look at all the parts of the puzzle, not just one part. And we need to make sure we're getting the right amount of data back. So we sit at an average at the moment, anywhere of 78 through to 90% completion rates, even with larger organizations. And the way we do that, twofold. Everyone knows that it's being done by a third-party company and all of the data is anonymous and their managers will never, ever see the raw scores and the raw answers. They get a report that tells them what to do with it. So you've got more psychological safety for people, to be honest. The second thing is we do a little bit of healthy emotional manipulation, which I'm very proud and happy to admit to. We, as a social enterprise, have decided that everything we do at BU should make a ripple effect that's bigger than us and bigger than the direct impact on our client. The way we do that with the workplace happiness diagnostic and the surveys is when we send it out to staff, say, hey, not only is this a chance for you to have a say in making your workplace a happier place to work for everyone, but by completing this survey, we're going to donate a day of clean drinking water to someone in need. You have 100 people in your team. If everyone does this survey, there's 100 days of clean drinking water getting donated. Now, what that says a little bit is people go, so if I don't fill out this 5-minute survey, which is fully anonymous, can never be traced back to me, someone doesn't drink today. Which is not necessarily the case, but it's enough for them to go, maybe I should do this. So just from that, I think over the last couple of years, we've donated close to 8,000 days of clean drinking water.
That's amazing.
Just from incentivizing people to go, here's a way you can make the world a little bit better and make your workplace a little bit better.
Yeah, I love that as an idea. I think it's, love it. I can just totally see how. Do you know what? I don't think we always think enough about. We talk about incentivizing the workplace, but often it always comes back to like monetary stuff. And as we all know, well and good by now, that is not the only thing that motivates people and engage. It's a nice thing to have. It's lovely, great. Everyone wants a bit more money, but it's like that fleeting moment of pleasure and joy. It's you've got it, you spend it too quickly and it's gone, or whatever. And then you want more. So it's. I like that. I think that's something that would give you a feeling that would feel warm and fuzzy for probably a bit longer than the money, personally, anyway. But I like that as an idea.
Yeah. Because people want to make a difference. Like, I firmly believe people want to make a difference in the world. We just often get so caught up in the busyness of life that we don't feel able to. We don't know where to start. So when something comes along that goes, this is something so easy that you can choose to do to make a positive impact in someone else's life, people choose it. They do take it. I don't remember the exact study, but I know there was a study done on workplace incentivization and like end of year bonuses and gifts.
Okay, yeah.
And they did a test where they measured how much of an end of year bonus, reward, gift, present. They did monetary reward, gifting to your staff. And third one was everyone gets a certain amount and their goal with it is to go out and make someone else's year. They said, go make someone's Christmas better because of what you've been given. And what they then did was they measured down the line, how happy were you? How much did that change your relationship with work? All the stuff that they wanted to look at. They found that the most impactful was the one where people were given something to benefit someone else. And what was even more interesting is the budget for that one was 3 times less than the other two. So if we go off raw numbers, they went, give every employee $100, give every employee $100 gift, or give every employee $33 to go make someone else happier. The last one had the best positive impact. Now, I'll put some caveats on this because I don't want anyone listening to this and going, Declan just told us a cheat code to spend 3 times less on our staff.
Yeah.
Right? The caveat on this is all the employees were in an organization and workplace that paid them well and paid them fairly. Their base needs were well and truly taken care of. I'm a huge believer when it comes to well-being at work. Financial well-being needs to be addressed first. Once financial well-being is done well, everything else builds on top of it. But do not ever try to tell me that you're building an employee well-being strategy with poor financial well-being. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast episode, but the whole focus on well-being being about just, are you getting away from your desk? Is your chair at the right angle? It's like, which mine is not right now, by the way, but that's not the point. It's so incredibly frustrating. Like, what are the things that actually take up people's brain capacity and time? It's the stress of, especially at the moment, it's a terrifying world for people to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we'll pick that one up on a separate stream, I think. So two more questions from me on this kind of theme is the punchy one that got us talking in the first place is who's responsible for workplace happiness?
So my answer to this has kind of evolved a little bit over the years. I used to be a huge believer in the individualistic nature of happiness. And I think that was a reflection of the society that I grew up in. This very much like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Your happiness is your own responsibility. There's a reason we have a massive multi-billion-dollar industry called self-help and we don't have a big multi-billion-dollar industry called community help. we have this over focus on what we do as individuals to be happier. And where my answer to this has changed in recent years in particular is understanding how much our systems and our relationships have an impact on our happiness.
Mm.
So what I will say now, the best approaches I've seen to creating workplace happiness combine a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Bottom-up is everyone goes, it is up to me to play a role in this. It is up to me to take a little bit of ownership and healthy responsibility over my own sense of happiness and well-being and purpose at work. But then also realizes that we fundamentally, as individuals, cannot change entire systems and structures without support and buy-in from the top down.
Yeah.
Top down is adequate resourcing. Top down is giving the right systems and support and structures. Top down is leadership and executive walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Mm.
Right. And so I now say, whose responsibility is it? Kind of everyone's, and both. If you are a leader, I think it does lean a little bit more in your camp. I'd say 60% top down, 40% bottom up is my personal preference for how to create happy workplaces, because there's more resources and more opportunity to lead change at the top end of the ladder, right? At the executive level, at the middle management level, there's just more room to make systemic change. And I will say, sometimes I come across leaders who get a bit frustrated and they go, oh, why is it my responsibility? And I said, look, okay, I'll level with you. It might not be your responsibility, but your employees' happiness is your opportunity. All those things we spoke about before in terms of increased productivity, increased performance, increased profitability, right? If that matters to you as a leader, if that matters to you as a workplace, then your employees' sense of happiness at work must also matter. So therefore, sure, you might say this isn't my responsibility. Cool. But it is your opportunity. It is your strategic advantage. And I'd encourage you to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is going back to that definition right at the start of it isn't this permanent state of pleasure and joy that you're aiming for. It's much broader than that, and bringing people on that journey to understand what it is they're trying to aim for, I think is really important, because we naturally go to this, what feels like an unachievable dream. So yeah, really interesting. I guess coming up to our time, one of my last questions would be if you could give like 2 or 3 tips to leaders and people managers. I guess it's a 2-part question. One for themselves, because big believer in, you've got to get yourself into a good place before you can help others. So for themselves, but then also when they're thinking about trying to increase happiness within their teams, what would you suggest that they could do?
Okay, I'm literally jotting them down, because if I was to start with 3, I was like, okay, let me get my thoughts out of my brain and onto some paper here so I can see them. So for any leader listening to this who goes, hey, happiness matters to me, happiness matters to the workplace, like this all makes sense. This is something that I want to lean into. Mm-hmm. I'd say your first steps. First one is you need to very clearly communicate and convey that your order of priorities as an organization has flipped compared to the traditional norm. What I mean by that is historically, most organizations and workplaces have the following order of priorities. Priority number 1, keep shareholders and stakeholders happy. We see this in small businesses that are owned by one person who are like, I want my business to work really well for me, all the way through to Fortune 500 companies that are on the stock exchange trying to get returns for their investors and show that in quarterly reports. First priority is keep shareholders and stakeholders happy. Second priority for most organizations is then going, well, we should probably care about our customers and our clients. Let's have a good customer experience. Let's keep them happy. And then maybe, if they get to it, and if there's enough time and resourcing left, they get to the third priority, which is let's care about our people, our staff, our employees. Let's have a great employee experience. Let's focus on workplace happiness in terms of our people experience. Being a visionary and pioneering happiness-led organization and leader requires you to flip that traditional approach to business entirely on its head. These humanistic businesses go, hey, if we take great care of our people and they love their work and we enable them to do their best work, well, guess what's going to automatically happen? They deliver a pretty good customer experience. They lead to more memorable customer experiences. They are the people who interact with our clients and customers, not the people in the suits in the boardroom, right? And so therefore, our customers have a better experience. And what happens when our customers have a better experience? They refer more, they return for more business, and they spend more, which, oh my God, look what happens then. The shareholders and stakeholders are happy. It is such a more sustainable approach to effective business and thriving business that it astounds me that more leaders and workplaces aren't doing it. So I'd say step one, very clearly communicate that. In fact, take what I just said, rewind to just that little section and play it for all the executives and leaders in your team. Right? Be like, let's just listen to this 1 minute of audio here, right? And say, this is our new priority order. Employees first, customers second, shareholders last, for the reasons I've shared. Step two, measure it. I'm a huge believer in the saying, what we measure, we can manage. Don't just pay lip service, actually track it and be transparent with your scores, because then you're held accountable. Say to your team, we care deeply about employee experience now. We're going to actually start measuring well-being, engagement, culture, leadership, resilience, the things that lead to workplace happiness. And we're going to tell you where we're doing well. We're going to celebrate together. And we're going to be honest about where we've still got room to go and do better. And then your last one, resource it. So after you get the measurements back, please don't go to your HR or your people and culture team and say, fix this, but we don't have any budget to give you and we don't have any time or resources to support you. Yeah. Some of the most burnt out and stressed people I see in organizations are the HR and the people and culture team. And they're the people who care the most about your damn people. So give them the resources they need to do it well, right? If you do those three things as a leader, now look, I'm pragmatic. I'm a big believer. You can go and do this yourself. If you want to do it quicker, easier, more effectively, more efficiently, sure, send me an email and me and my team can come in and do it with you. But start with those steps, right? Yeah. Flip your order of priorities, measure it, and then resource it.
Brilliant. I love it. So my very last question is, if you could hear us talk about any other topic on this podcast, what would you like to hear covered?
Ooh, I would love, I don't know if you've already done this, but I think a fantastic one would be to talk about why there are so many bad leaders. Because of those things that we measure in workplaces, well-being, engagement, culture, leadership, and resilience, leadership has the biggest impact. It has the biggest impact on the other factors. If you want to change people's well-being and engagement and culture at work, one of the best levers you can pull is good leaders. And yet, so many organizations have terrible leaders. So talking about why is there so many bad leaders at work, what has led to that, I think would be fascinating. And I have someone in mind that you should interview for that too. So I'll send you their name.
Please send it my way, because I have a lot of thought. I feel like that could maybe be a bit of a round table one, because I've got lots of thoughts on it, and I know a few other people who might as well. So yeah, send over details. I'm definitely down for that. Well, Declan, honestly, this has been such a pleasure. Just such an interesting topic, and I think incredibly important. So I really appreciate you sharing the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.